All right. Welcome to the XExamine podcast. And today
We
we're
have
gonna
uh, we have a special program today where instead of talking about the misery that politics usually uh, oppresses on us, we're going to be talking about something a little bit otherworldly.
I like that.
Yeah. So in the news, I guess there's been some meetings involving the possible existence of UFOs and the phenomena the military has been experiencing lately.
Very interesting. Yeah, some Senate hearings, and I know a lot of this can go back for anybody else who has been a watcher of Joe Rogan, where he had Commander David Fravor on, who was a Navy pilot and was one of the more prominent people who has said to have chased UFOs in his fighter jet and captured them with his various instruments, including on video footage and locking in on it and being able to calculate its changes in elevation, in speed, how fast it stops, how fast it accelerates, rises, drops, seemingly sometimes at right angles. I think any sort of internet search about flying tic tac might bring up something like that. As I said, it looked like a tic tac, at least during that his experience. And that's interesting, as you were saying about the government being more forthcoming with at least having discussions about this.
Yeah, it seemed kind of unavoidable as soon as Fravor started coming out. More so in a way that, like, if anyone else is familiar with like the stories from the '80s involving Bob Lazar and his purported sort of experiences at the secret Area 51, um, sort of, these sorts of like, I don't want to call them like urban phenomena, but they're like sort of modern day mythologies that you're not really sure what to think when you hear something like that. But when you have someone like David Fravor, where you have the video evidence, you have the testimony, and you have the fact that he's well respected, like you have the character reference essentially, it's really hard, I think, to pass up a discussion following that sort of phenomenon, especially when you get like really good discussion from Fravor with any of those interviewers, Joe Rogan or Lex Friedman, or even like I think he had like a 60-minute one, which was pretty good.
Oh,
Essentially, him talking about the same story. I wanted to watch multiple ones with him just to see if there's any variations in the story. And there wasn't really, but it also doesn't come off as a story that's like fake, that you have to like stick to certain bullet points. So I believe him. I think that he had experienced something. What that something is what's really kind of like the meat of where the conversation has to go next. So, what is this tic tac? This flying fuselage of about 40 feet, which, like, coming from a pilot, pilots have to be incredibly knowledgeable of all the different sorts of aircrafts they could encounter, because they have to make all those decisions midair. What's friend? What's foe? What could be dangerous? What isn't? They're kind of at the front lines of our defense. So it's really interesting, I think, when individuals such as that, who are highly knowledgeable of all the things that could be misinterpreted, not only as someone who's highly educated in the field, but as someone who's trained to um, get around that sort of like possible fakes.
we
I
really
think it
have the
just, yeah,
we have the best person possible that's trying to determine the differential diagnosis, which is exactly as you described. I have all this information compiled about identifying anything else that's in the sky that I will see either visually or with my instruments. When I see something that is so wildly different that it doesn't adhere to any of those criteria, then what am I supposed to think? Yeah, am I flying this jet through the sky and just at any moment I'm imagining my entire aircraft being attacked? and I'm completely vulnerable, or yeah, is this the only tic tac, the one that I'm looking at right now? Because if something can, and forgive me for some of the details that have escaped me, I believe the one that he was reporting could drop down to within like 50 feet of sea level and then just stop with
Yeah,
seemingly no deceleration, just from going to stopped at crazy speeds and then making right angle maneuvers and then moving at extraordinary speeds as well.
absolutely. It looked like an object that was somehow, I wouldn't say like coming in and out of reality, but it just wasn't behaving with the sort of aerodynamics that we traditionally associate with moving through, the aerial medium, especially at the different strata to go from such a crazy distance to an absolute stop is pretty incredible. So, like,
Which
from
requires a
his,
hovering capability as well. Then,
yep, yep, absolutely. So again, it's this sort of like phenomena that really comes down to what the hell are we looking at here? And it's, I think, pretty easy to go in the direction of, I don't want to say science fiction because it seems only logical at this point that we're dealing with something that we don't completely understand, and that's concerning. I think that should be concerning, at least for our national security.
definitely for national security, whether it's a potentially foreign adversary that has something that you have no defense against. What do you think is scarier? If it were another nation of humans somewhere that had this technology, or an extraterrestrial community that had this capability? We don't know whether it's just strictly speed, whether anything can be potentially weaponized. What do you think is more frightening?
To me, I think it's more frightening to imagine it belonging to extraterrestrials because I think if there was some sort of human agency behind it, one that's almost reassuring in a weird way, because that means that it's capable for our side to build it very easily or to copy it. Maybe they were just the first ones to come across, kind of how like the rest of the world was kind of at a little standstill when the first atomic bomb was dropped. Because it's like, okay, now we know one country has the big ones.
Hmm.
So, but like all of a sudden, those other countries, they didn't all of a sudden cower to the United States per se, but they all initiated some sort of espionage in order to get their hands on this technology.
Yeah, that's true. And they were infiltrating the very research groups that were working on it as well. I know some of the
Yeah,
top scientists ended up being, I think, Russian scientists as well.
yeah, and it's like within what, 4 years, Russia had the atomic weapon, something like that.
Yeah, that timeline I don't know very well. I know that.
It was quite quick because they were already doing hydrogen stuff, I think, in the 50s.
Okay.
I think so, at least. I could be mistaken on those exact dates, but it wasn't super long because we were already concerned about nuclear strikes by the time Kennedy's presidency was. So it had to have happened, somewhere between obviously end of the War of 45 and 1963.
Okay, that makes sense. I follow that reasoning.
Because you have like the Bay of Pigs invasion that was, almost necessary because if they're going to put nuclear installations in Cuba, I'm just kind of going off of that reasoning.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about that rationale, or the
So
the risk of energy weapons so close to home that are placed there because, well, they're placed there with essentially one ultimate goal, which is to destroy you.
yeah, absolutely. So, there's only so much I think that you can do. And even if you're acting on bad information, it at least has a little bit more of an understanding sort of feel to it. But I feel like what we should be worried about is that it is extraterrestrial because we should always be I think afraid of an extraterrestrial threat. I'm of the belief, okay, so if you go off of um, the idea that humans evolved through evolution and that life, let's say like life did start on Earth and or panspermia, whatever, it doesn't really matter all that much how it began. The fact is that if it can spontaneously generate, then there's nothing particularly special about where we're at, in my opinion, that would have prevented this facilitation of life otherwhere in the cosmos. And if that is true, just statistically speaking, even if it is incredibly rare, you would still have countless amounts of civilizations just because of the sheer amount of stuff that's out there. And now, if that's true, then we can't have any sort of like human centric reasoning involving our specific existence on a timeline. I feel like aliens would then necessarily be of all sorts of cultural stages that vary, that are on a continuum, that they have their own bell curve distribution throughout a temporal existence. So you do have to assume that there are a few civilizations that have probably made some really, really spectacular scientific advancement, and you just don't know what they are, who they are, and what their intention is. I don't believe any of this new age crap that somehow if we expand our consciousnesses, we'll just be in like cosmic socialist utopian communion with aliens. I feel like that's such a silly fucking stupid idea that you have to assume that if they are the like they would have to be the apex predators of their uh planet. Let's just assume they only own one planet, or maybe a collective of planets at that point in time, depending on how big they are. And you just don't know what kind of goals they have, because I think you do have to assume if they are sentient life like us, because it's the only sentient life that we really have studied and known, then we have to attribute some of um our compulsions as a species onto that. We do have to anthropomorphize just because it's our only example of sentience. That's what I'm getting at. Not to necessarily say that they have to be, but I'm more of a conservative in this area. Like you kind of have to be. You have to be a little bit more like, okay, well, I'd rather be protected in case the Vikings come, because if they end up being just a bunch of interesting, international sort of people that want to just be your friends, well, at least you're prepared for the alternative.
Yes, one of them has a very severe outcome. It's like Wayne Gretzky saying you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. If you don't take the shot, you'll never score a point. If you do take the shot, you might score a point. So if you have the defenses, you might be able to put up a fight. If you don't have any defenses, you surely will have no defense.
Yep, absolutely. And you can't rely on that sort of like new agey thinking, I think, unfortunately, to kind of poison the public's what's the word I'm looking for, like their intention, so to speak, when it comes to this subject.
It's way more advantageous to assume that and treat it as if it were dangerous and then be wrong. It's like the shadow outside your home as you're walking up to like your side door, and you would rather see the shadow, think it's a burglar, and take defensive action and find out it's the shadow of a tree that's moving in the wind, than the other way around, where you see like a shadow by your front door as you approach it, and then you go, oh, I shouldn't be mean, that's probably just a tree, and then it's like a burglar, and then you're kidnapped or robbed or assaulted and battered.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's like game theory applied to aliens.
Yeah, which I think that's exactly the sort of like point we should be at in our society, is really thinking about our venturing into space and then what kind of consequences that may have in return. It could just be that we have been lucky this entire time, and if we were to ask the question of why are these things showing up now, my response to that is that it actually makes more sense to think the opposite way. And this is the one area where I actually think the aliens guys have a little bit of a good point. You know, it's more likely that they've always been here than the other way around if you just wanted to do it based off statistics. Because again, why would that particular, like, even if we invented some sort of atomic weaponry, that really doesn't mean anything. We like to think that it's important because it's important to us as a species, but like on the, like, maybe it was the telegraph actually that, you know, gave their attention, or like made the our sort of species, um give them worth or whatever. You know, it's like you have no idea what the sort of extraterrestrial sentience is thinking of. So I don't know. I tend to think that despite it sounding odd, maybe if they're at an advanced enough level that they would easily conceal themselves from us for the most part.
And by that you mean they're cloaking their existence, and they're primarily in essentially like in the skies, and then they come every now and then, or you're saying they more or less walk amongst us or live amongst us or exist, maybe not in human form, but in ways that they are preventing our senses from being notified of their presence, however their form is, because they might not have, maybe they're non-carbon life, maybe they have uh, like neither right-handed nor left-handed molecules that they're made of, and maybe they're fourth dimensional, so their interaction with our matter is different.
It is a really interesting question. I would probably say in my case, I'm thinking a little bit more former than the latter. Um, Not because it would be particularly more difficult to reason that that is the case, but I just, that it's just, you know, you have amount of evidence, and then the more that I have to extrapolate from that evidence, I think the less good my reasoning would be. So it's more or less that we've seen these drones, or what we assume to be drones, flying around, that we have on tape, with Fravor and other military personnel who have come forward to discuss this sort of thing. So I feel like there's good evidence, at least, that like the drones are around.
Okay, kind of like a Occam's razor application to UFOs. Whatever the most simple or likely explanation could be, then we can focus on that more so than finding ways to explain how the more rare probabilities could exist.
Yes, yes. Now there's also a possibility that it is the United States themselves, and the fact that they have to hide things from their own branches of government also makes sense. I really don't know how deep the shadow sort of, technology goes, but I think it's, you know, a really good point to bring up too in any modern day society, especially with the advent of how badly technology escaped us during the early stages of the Cold War. You know, the whole spy game has continued, and I'm sure things have, more strategies have been implemented in it, and the game itself has evolved.
Very true.
So now, like, the interesting thing with the talk with the senators is, the guys who are presenting this information are actually saying, hey, look, we actually may need more black budget programs to combat this threat or to figure out what it is. And I think that's an interesting question to bring up, because for someone like me, and I think it's a good check too on like my own personal political philosophy, which is all about transparency in government and having all these sorts of things. But like, is there actually a line to draw, and where that is? And how do you sort of compensate for the fact that you kind of need these shadow programs, in an era when you don't trust your government?
Wow. Especially ringing ringing bells and hitting home in light of all these current events where there's a lot of hardship and there's a lot of government spending, and there's a lot of people who feel like they are not benefiting from that spending indirectly or directly. 40 billion for Ukraine is what comes to mind. A lot of people might say, I didn't vote for that. And then they might position that next to baby formula shortages. And there are people in Mexico who are receiving like multiple $100 benefits, like of cash from the US government through, they're funneling money through other organizations that I can't remember the name of, but this is also public information that can be looked up, where we're just giving out hundreds of dollars to people and trying to get them to come into the States. And people might feel like that's not fair if they're paying into all these systems that are helping everybody accept themselves while they're suffering. Like it might be easier for somebody who has all their needs taken care of to say, I have no problem giving extra money. But we're just in a very strange time and expected to pay more and more, and to just trust that how it's being spent is necessary and that we have less and less of a say. And I'm not saying every single person should be like they get a piece of paper and a pencil and vote about every single thing that happens for expediency. That's just impossible. And then there's many other concerns about just the normal functioning of everyday life. It's all just kind of a mess with a complex, large society that has a very tall, very wide organization that manages everything, or that attempts to manage everything.
Right? Whose scope seems to be getting bigger every year, every election cycle. Doesn't matter. It does seem between the two parties who gets elected, government expands underneath them. It just expands a little bit faster under one party versus another.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And there's only ever more laws. Very rarely are laws repealed that are unneeded at the same rate that they are added and compound. So it's just wading through a swamp as we attach more balls and chains, add some quicksand, some alligators. Can't figure out which direction you're going. It's dark.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like the size of the government has done a lot to erode our individual sovereignty as a democratic people. I think that when you're voting, I mean, it's just like a basic numbers game. The less people who are voting on a specific thing, the more impact that individual vote has.
Okay.
Um, and we can extend that idea outside of just plain voting to wages, obviously, because there is such a thing as voting with your dollar. And we
Yeah.
do that much more frequently than we do casting a paper ballot. So there's something to be said about how the system itself doesn't really differentiate, nor could it's just a different sort of currency to be used. But there's kind of like this overarching idea then of like, we need to determine then the proper role of government, because we can't just be handing away, hand over fist, all of this money towards like different governments that can't seem to differentiate between, hey, we need this black budget project for something really fucking important for our national security, versus the politician who, hey, I want to look good for my constituents, so I get voted in and I can continue to be a parasite on our system. And I think we're having like this unfortunate like mashup where we obviously prefer the former to exist and not the latter, but we kind of have both.
I'm also thinking right now about all the unelected positions of government and how we don't know who any of these people are. We don't know what they do. Have they been doing a good job as public servants? And then how are they adjudicated? And if we find ourselves in disagreement, how do we remedy that, up to and including removing somebody from a position of office where their work is funded by taxpayer dollars?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that a lot can be said about um, just the individual taking responsibility for their place inside the world. Just being like, hey, don't ignore this. Don't ignore your own participation inside the entire process. Learn as much as you can about the individuals in your own area. And you can affect change from the bottom up. Absolutely. It's been done. Obviously, I think that's how this country began and can continue to grow from. It's just that the proportion of the government going out of control is proportionate to the amount the American people have let go of their own responsibility.
Mm, I see.
So it's one of those things where I think any reasonable human being in matters of national security, knowing that not every not every bit of sentience, you know, in our own world, obviously, right now we're used to that as being human sentience, but you could expand that category, just being like, look, even other humans aren't nice to each other. Like, you can't just expect anything beyond that to be in one category or the other. It'll probably be a continuum. And to be on the safe side, if you really care and want to take responsibility for your area, you're going to have to kind of adopt a little bit more of a parental view. If you think about these citizens as an extension of your family, and you want to protect your family, there's certain strategies that have to be enacted, and that's why I kind of think of like these black budget programs are the one area where I am okay with having less transparency in order to facilitate that goal. Whether, and then it's going to be hard to say if that goal would be met or not. And that's kind of like a leap of faith we almost, I think, have to deal with.
We definitely have to take steps to have a plan in place. I definitely believe you're right about that, whether it's transparent or opaque to some or many people, because worst case scenario, no matter how unlikely, does have, or it's like what we know. There are objects that can move faster than we can explain that could be weaponized, that could be another country, or that could be another alien extraterrestrial species. And that makes me think there are many different forms of consciousness and sentience, and we kind of imagine aliens being like us and how we perceive our environment, but there's all sorts of life forms even on earth that, like grass and trees, they're sentient. And like, let's just say somehow there's nutrients in a jar and you have to live off them and the tree has to live off them. If the tree is capable of doing it, it will take those nutrients for itself and then you will die. And it's not malevolent, it's just going to happen. That's how things will play out. So, and you have mitochondria, your little energy factories in all your cells. And luckily, that's a symbiotic relationship where they're producing the energy currency for our body and they're producing ATP. But their understanding of life is radically different. And I don't know if they're sentient. I don't know if they have some equivalent consciousness, but from plants to organisms that are within our cells to viruses that seem to only be alive when they have a host to replicate in and to use our machinery. Like, if we see this little flying tic tac, what if that's just kind of a feeler from this alien species that may not really even, I mean, I guess it's possible that it can be exploring Earth and not know that we are there and potentially kill us inadvertently. In the same way, I think it was Elon Musk talking about digital artificial superintelligence being the greatest threat to humanity. And if it determines that the best outcome is X, then it will just push for that. And in the same way that a bulldozer that's flattening land, moving dirt to build a building, it's crushing ants. And it's not because they want the ants to die. It's just a matter of course. As a result of their actions, they inadvertently destroyed ant colonies, trees, the fungal networks that communicate between trees, just irreparably changing the soil and microenvironment. We lay concrete on top of a bunch of stuff, change the solar wind interaction in the area. But it's just like so many butterfly effects that uh, whether the aliens have whether the aliens are aware of us or not aware of us, and then if they are aware of us, if they are benevolent or malevolent, in all of those cases, it is most advantageous to have a defensive plan in place for the continuation of our species.
Absolutely. I think that was very wonderfully said. Like, I didn't even consider that they may or may not even recognize us as like a sentient species. Like, we could just be like a tree to them as well. I don't know how fast their minds process information. Like, maybe we're just moving far too slow to be recognized as life from where they come from to be the same. Because I mean, like, that's another thing that I find interesting, that there are papers written by real physicists talking about how there could be aliens living inside the sun, just because of the way that you define life and how things could replicate. It's just a temperature gradient difference. You know, that there could be like some sort of, I don't know, like you don't necessarily have to think about like solar primates per se, but you know, some maybe set of like neurons or some sort of digital, organic digital computer or something like that. All sorts of weird things could happen that we just don't recognize as life happening out there right now. Um,
That's amazing. Yeah, there's
yeah,
nothing, there is no rule book for any other life, and even our own forms of life are, yes, they follow some basic structures. Oh, everything is has some sort of carbon component, but beyond that, I mean, the way that humans and all like animal kingdom makes energy is the exact opposite of how plant life makes energy. Like we break stuff and burn like sugar, and then plants split water molecules day in, day out. Nobody bats an eyelid. They're using like the sun to perform chemical and quantum functions to create sugar. And then they also respirate and produce oxygen and use CO2. And we're like the opposite. So it's so strange that there's a lot of variation in our own very life forms, so that we really have to be open. And at first thought, oh, life in the sun, yeah, okay, but there are all sorts of life forms even from here that can extreme or can survive the extreme vacuum of space, being irradiated with cosmic radiation on the outside of lunar rovers and other spacefaring craft, extreme acid, heat, like just because we exist in a certain range and it's tough for us to live outside that range, other life forms have no problem. And if you believe that all of our life forms here came from a single point origin, then the amount of diversity that could exist in all of the known universe is quite remarkable. So unless I can disprove it, then I should say I cannot rule that out as a possibility.
absolutely, absolutely. You would have to have the entire information of the universe. I can't even say known universe because it actually has to expand beyond that, of the entire reality in order to actually make those judgments. I think, because the
Yeah.
truth is that we just have not explored those areas to that extent with that amount of precision.
If we are a subset of the information, then we are not equipped to make conclusions about other subsets.
Right, absolutely. Especially for how big the container is. You know, it would be a lot different if Pluto was it. You know, for as far as like the universe is concerned, but the amount of space that we have, the fact that we may even have extra planets beyond Pluto yet that are far, far out there.
Hmm.
The search for Planet X has always been an interesting topic that I've looked into from time to time as being, you know, possible planets that just kind of expanded or exist inside the Oort cloud.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So there's, we don't even know the minutia of our own solar system yet, let alone outside of that. But um, I think as stewards and apex predators of this planet, the fact that our goal should be more or less to survive, we have to be considering things that may sound a little extreme to people who are used to just being the center of the universe. Like even though Galileo has um, told us a long time ago that we are not the center of the solar system or universe, uh, nothing has stopped our culture from pretending like we are. That it's just our 9 to 5 jobs that are the only things that exist, and what we're going to get Johnny and Susie for Christmas, and whether or not I hate my job or not, or if I'm going to get extra vacation time this year.
Did I
I
get
feel like
enough?
there's,
How many likes did I get on my social media profile?
yeah, exactly, exactly. We have to be expanding our, I hate to say it new agey, but I will. We have to expand our consciousness, at least our awareness of things a little bit beyond there, and kind of act more like adults. Otherwise, we're just kind of like rats going through a maze.
Hmm.
Now, that isn't to say that we have any of the skills necessary in order to even move on that front, but maybe we can provide something to help those who can. I'm sure Elon has secret programs that he's working on involving deep space travel. Beyond that of SpaceX, I just think he's also putting all of his effort into actually building practical things that we can do now. But I think those are actually Plan B, if I had to guess. I think Elon's a smart enough guy to know that we have to make some sort of movement towards some sort of non-rocket based propulsion. Maybe not propulsion is not the right word, but some sort of movement
Hmm.
dynamics.
Yeah, it's a very good way to say it. Just movement dynamics.
I think it's interesting thing to think about what kind of possibilities these sorts of like tic tacs and stuff provide us. Like, if this is real, and we're going off the fact that these things could be mechanical, I should say, like the possibility that these things could be mechanical, point to a version of physics that already exists in this world. It's like if a caveman viewed an atomic bomb and all of a sudden it dawned on him that this is possible.
This is a really good point. I was trying to think uh, what kind of major shifts in technology, if you break it down in 50 years or 100 years, pretty much our entire lifestyle is just radically different, but it's so accepted during that time. Like right now, our communication pathways about how you and I are communicating with each other. And, 100 years ago, people being on horse and buggies moving around. And then before that, before people decided, you know what, there's an animal with 4 legs, I'm going to try to ride it. Like these ideas are just so wild for their time. And when the caveman sees that nuclear weapon detonate, all of that was capable during his time period as well. So,
Yep, absolutely. We're assuming that the state of physics hasn't really changed. So now we're kind of left with, well, if this is possible, then all we need to do is kind of answer how, which is kind
hmm,
of nice in a way. It's a very interesting, like this should get people, I think, excited in a way that we have not been excited about things before.
I like that. The only question is how.
Yep. It
And
seems to have control of gravity, at least for itself, which I think is like the most important key feature that we need to zoom in on. This thing is not moving in a dynamic way that suggests propulsion of our sort of conventional Newton third law sort of way.
it's
You know,
exactly what I
for
was thinking.
Yep, for every action is an equal and opposite reaction, which we've kind of played out the entire way. Like, even though we've only had airplanes for like 100 years, like look at the amount of freaking innovation there has been going from the Wright brothers to the SR-71 Blackbird. in less than 100 years.
Wow.
It's just to me, it's just absolutely insane to think about that way. So like things could accelerate, absolutely, no pun intended, with these new forms of
Things could accelerate.
and we're hoping they will. But in my opinion, there has to be something then involving gravity. I mean, I have my own thoughts on gravity. I did take some physics just to let the audience know. Obviously, I'm no master at it, not even close, but I'm not like a slouch either when it comes to physics. I did my calc based, um, you know, differential equations and mechanics. So it's literal rocket science. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that there's got to be some interesting feature then of gravity, which actually makes it com-
Manipulatable.
manipulatable. And if not gravity itself, then somehow how the Higgs boson interacts and gives particles mass, or the Higgs field, however you want to describe that certain reaction. There's got to be a way then to manipulate this field in order to change either the effect gravity has at a local level, or kind of manipulate its relationship then with either if there's like if gravitons exist, because we're not really sure, that's still like a theoretical particle. But if like gravity and mass are these two separate things that just have a unique relationship, then we sort of have to figure out, where is this relationship fungible.
I really like that because with charge, there always appears to be positive and negative. One is attractive, one is repulsive. So with gravity, it can't simply be one directional, could it? I mean, I guess anything is possible, but if it could be determined that there was a repulsive form of gravity in the same way that um, I'm imagining a roller coaster going up to the top of a hill and it has like a little gear set and the spokes are grabbing, they're on this chain. So if we can visualize this gravitational field and go one direction, then we can go the opposite direction. And I think I'm challenged because it's difficult to visualize gravity, and because we can't see it, it's harder for us to understand it.
Absolutely. I think that the abstraction has to kind of go in the ways of other abstract quantities that we know of. What I mean by that is like look at light, for example. Light can be infrared or it could be ultraviolet, and yet it's still traveling at the same speed. It's just the
Okay.
amount of energy that's in there is different, which is wild to think about. And that's because, some of our particles are divided into different categories that either construct, or they interact constructively, or they become exclusive. So what I mean by that is that there are certain wavelengths that can stack on top of each other and kind of more or less exist in the same area. And then there are other particles that are exclusionary, that they follow the principle that, that matter only exists in that specific place at that specific time. So what I'm getting at is that maybe gravity is actually some sort of weirdly constructing field, almost like sound, where the
Hmm.
more mass you have, you're just kind of like constantly, excuse me, you're constantly interfering constructively. And maybe there's a way to manipulate gravity as if it is a wave, to cancel out parts of it and to amplify other parts of it.
I'm definitely open to the possibility of this. There should be a way that it could be manipulated in the same way that I'm imagining how different conventional explosive materials are, like a normal bomb versus the atom bomb that we were talking about. And even that has subsets with fission, where you're splitting atoms, and then fusion, where you're fusing atoms. both yielding extraordinary levels of energy, far exceeding conventional explosives. And so our methods of propulsion, as you said, we've kind of played it out where we're using Newton's third laws to, I'm going to push something one way and that's going to make me go the other way. In the same way that we have internal combustion engines, and we have found amazing ways to extract energy out of exploding dinosaur juice and decomposing plants from a long, long time ago. And then we're like, how about we also use electron configurations and manipulate them? And that's also served as the basis for the microprocessor, for computers, for transistors, capacitors, batteries. And it's a very interesting source of energy. And there are even other forms of energy, perhaps harnessing gravity in such a way that it's just so different
It
that maybe
really will be the major game changer, especially because gravity seems to be, even though it's the weakest of our four or five, depending on how you count them, fundamental forces, we do have this like confounding variable, which is gravity. Like just the quantum field theory and gravity, special relativity, I should say, from Einstein, do not seem to mesh up currently. And this is like a known problem in physics, is that the two phenomena that we seem to, and the reason why they don't talk to each other is more or less the fact that they are still really good at describing a portion of our observable universe. So we don't want to like reject them, even though we know fundamentally that something's got to give. So I think it is kind of silly that we keep trying to play this stupid game involving grants in which, we have to kind of pretend like everything's fine and we're making all of these small adjustments, even though everyone probably in the back of their heads like, yeah, but none of this shit is actually working. So I don't know how long we're going to continue smashing particles into one another before we realize we're just smashing particles into one another.
the PDF factory must remain open.
It absolutely does. It's like, yeah, I'm, CERN and light or whatever, all those different facilities are, I'm sure they've added to our knowledge, but it seems I don't know how to put this well enough, but they need to start producing results soon, I should say, because it's
And by
all
results,
money being spent.
you mean maybe like practical results, or how like
Yeah,
applied sciences versus uh, scientific, like adding to the scientific base. Like, hey, now we know under these conditions this happens. It's the synthesis maybe that's difficult. Of how does that relate to our life on this planet?
yeah, absolutely. I think that sciences in many ways have to always be applied. It's nice to have all of this interesting information, I guess, going around, but it seems like it has not aided our goals as much as just experimenting in a lab, engineering wise, has. Like whereas if we experiment to engineer, like on an engineering standpoint, of course, like it takes a lot of engineering to create CERN and all these sorts of things. But if you look at a lot of the modern ways people are trying to figure out information from these systems, it's pretty simplistic. It still relies on a lot of beam splitters and lasers and different types of wavelength manipulation that we already know how to do to, I think, like edge out information. Like maybe the questions they're pursuing aren't that interesting. And maybe they should be more comfortable with reaching a little bit further for something a little bit harder to obtain, but more worthwhile in the long run.
I wonder if part of that is the difficulty in securing funding, because maybe they're being incentivized to follow this route that is not producing great viable results for humanity, but it's also, of all the difficult ways that it that they could take to procure funding, this one is the least painful and requires the least amount of work to secure funding. And at least I feel like I'm contributing some by getting this grant money or this research money. And so it could be the system that they're operating in carries some responsibility to improve and say, okay, we got to start like reanalyzing how, or like the rubric, the metric about who's getting this funding. It's not just we need somebody to produce surprising and novel results. We need
Yeah,
a maybe more a revision of the overarching goal of research as a whole, which is just finding differences. And it seems like a lot of the research is just like a data collection. Like, hey, we found this difference. Hey, this is Sally farts on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. It's like, all right, that's
absolutely.
just information for the sake of information is not really useful unless it can be a component of something greater,
Absolutely.
which
I mean,
which
I
I'm sure they're working for that. But
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm not trying to like say what they're doing is worthless, but it's just hard not to see the difference between an organization like DARPA take a lot less funding and turn it into a myriad of technologies which are just absolutely insane.
hmm, I'm
Everything from like attempting weather control to the basics of our drones and robotics. They've created remote control beetles,
oh wow.
where they're able to implant electrodes at the larval stage. And then by the time it pupates into an adult, it's like a fully remote control beetle.
Oh my gosh.
All the spy technology and stuff that they've developed, it just feels like there's this quantitative difference between what these scientists are doing at these bigger sort of university type settings versus like how military can just take the same sort of funding and just go 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 with all these different wild and crazy ideas that they just try and then if it doesn't work they're back to the drawing board creating something else. And it's like it doesn't matter the amount of failures they built up, they've at least explored all those avenues in a quick iterative cycle which allows them to just jump to the next thing.
This is kind of an interesting segue for something I forgot to mention earlier, which is I know there is a form of flight that relies on ions, and they have to be pretty light, very small aircraft, but they're still bigger than you would think. They can be, maybe up to the size of like this computer monitor that I'm looking at. And it's essentially, I don't know if floating is probably not the correct term, but it's taking advantage of the charge of ions that are naturally present in ambient air. And it's a form of movement that's just there's no propellers, there's no explosions of rocket fuel, and
That's really interesting. It reminds me a lot of there used to be this theory called electrogravity, which people have done away with, but I know in some part Nikola Tesla was touching on it, or he believed it, that there was some sort of fundamental uh actual like field connection between gravity and electricity that we haven't explored or has um I don't know if disproven is the right word because again, it's like if nothing's really been proven, then I don't really know how much can be said to be disproven. But I mean, like more than like the Earth is flat. Even then, like a lot of interesting questions I think have come from asking what people may think are silly questions. It's if you're not willing to just allow your mind to be as fully open as possible and to truly question everything, I think you will stifle yourself from getting to new and interesting results.
I think there are a lot of people at the college level of academia, and without assaulting specific topics, I'll just let the audience take whatever college class you think of as the most frivolous.
All of social
And
sciences, but go ahead.
and if they just redirected their efforts away from those topics and to really tackling and trying to chew on the most difficult subjects regarding the nature of reality and the existence of sentient life that has volition, rather than, say, studying spiritual friendship or many other topics that people really believe are truly important. And it really is actually short sighted, will not make any significant gains, and is actually a cop out. It's a failure to take on something truly challenging because they're whiny and they cry a lot.
Yeah, it does seem like the current fad of deconstructionism has really been, I mean, how could it be anything else but detrimental to anything that you're trying to build upon? But in academia itself, I think the fight for grant money, everyone's become so myopic in the sorts of, and again, I don't know if this is like just because they're incentivized to do so, or if they have just become fundamentally greedy because of a lack of um, community, I guess you could say. The fact that a lot of academia looks at itself as being other and is the critic that should judge normal civilization, and so they therefore don't feel like they belong to it. So I'm not really sure if these sorts of factors have contributed to a situation in which we've kind of become less humble in the realm of academics, and we've become less interested in discovering things that we really need to discover if we're going to progress in any sort of meaningful way.
We really have come to that. I really strongly agree with that point. We the hubris is so incredible, where people think that they can eliminate alternative possibilities without ever actually exploring them and disproving them, simply because they think that they have the answers. So, as a God Sod would say, it's a eulogy to the scientific method, because we have it all figured out. We're just geniuses. We have all the answers.
It's really sad because I feel like it's just such the antithesis of discovery and the excitement of discovery. If you know everything, then it's good luck being bored with the rest of your life.
Hmm.
There's
It
a
would be
difference, I
boring.
think, between yeah, there's a difference between like being bored because you know everything and being bored because you're hand tied. And I feel like in some
Hmm.
ways we've been hand tied with a growing amount of taxation, real or imposed upon us through forms of inflation. There's a certain amount of hand tying that is kind of not allowed us to pursue as normal people interesting new avenues. It feels like everyone's working paycheck to paycheck. A lot more families have both parents working, including their kids going off to work at such a young age. I feel like that kind of stuff can be antithetical to like real progress because there's a certain sense in which, if you look back through our history on who's made scientific, literary, and artistic progress, it's rich people who are bored. And there's something to be said about how you navigate your hierarchy of needs, the more your basic needs are met. So, like that kind of boredom, I think, is really good for society at large because it means that we've conquered and mastered the smaller things along the way. And we've done so to impact the material welfare of the majority of our citizens. So I think the more kids you have going to college who don't have to work, and the more that they're thrust into an honest working environment that involves science, engineering, mathematics, but it could also be any of the other fields as well. We would have better literature if we were more open in this way, and we would have better social sciences if we were open in this sort of way where we didn't have to constantly be fighting for funds because people would just have kind of basic things already met. I know a lot of people that we went to school with who would, I think, have gone further if they didn't just have to worry about like stupid tax bills that came up every year. I would even count myself included that many. Like the fact that I worked like 3 jobs through most of my college years, I think has really like stifled my potential in a way. Not that, I want to complain or anything like that, but like it just feels like it's natural that it would have an effect.
That falls in line with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're worried about or concerned about where your next meal is coming from, then you're probably not too concerned, about your a 401k and your retirement. So it's
Hmm.
just first things first, your basic needs, your shelter, and then just the more things you have under control, then the more you can send out feelers and improve the other parts of your life.
Yeah, it's just like astonishing to me that in the 21st century, we can't produce a society where there's a lot of people whose basic needs involving just like an area to sleep, an area to work, some food, and like basic laundry and cleanliness sort of services, we wouldn't have already created all of these amazing things. We would have had cities underneath the ocean, and even like the possibilities, like there are plenty of ways to terraform planets that don't necessarily involve living on the surface and doing like Carl Sagan had ideas of living in the clouds of Jupiter or Venus,
Hmm.
and like a lot of this sort of like science fictiony stuff that people normally attribute to this sort of I don't know, fantastical age that never was. Like it's all possible. It's just a different degree of engineering solutions. And yeah, there's something to be said about, okay, well, how practical this is, and that practicality is done through a lens of our current economic situation. But like if we just had a little bit of a better way of organizing our economics, I think we would have easily gotten to a much easier and farther point. So like we're literally just talking about getting people like a hotel room that they can stay at and go work in a lab somewhere. It's like it's literally as easy as that, right?
This is amazing that part of the solution is already available. We just have to rearrange some of the pieces to facilitate it, to make it the reality.
Yeah, because like right now we have a bunch of business bros who are doing dick measuring contests with yachts. And it's like a really pathetic waste of all of this money. Not to say that necessarily that they didn't deserve it or yada yada yada, but at the same time, it's kind of just like this is pathetic. Like our rich people class is pathetic. Elon is like literally single handedly doing the majority of sort of humanities with his money, where everyone else is like, I don't know what they're doing. Like I'm surprised Bill Gates hasn't like solved all of Africa's problems by himself by now. He had plenty of time. There's plenty of money to go around. If he was well organized enough to start Microsoft, not really sure why a lot of the world's problems, if he was so concerned in actually doing that, would have not been easily solved by now. Especially like if a lot of the ones just required clean drinking water and mosquito nets. You feel like that sort of stuff would be done in a decade.
These are all pretty good points. So somehow we've ended up with a lot of sprinklers when that same amount of water could be a few impactful waterfalls, really
Yeah,
making a difference.
and you have companies like BlackRock who are just like in this like petty attempt to gain power by trying to get as much real estate as possible. Like how fucking pathetic is this? Like we have supervillains whose like motives are just the most pathetic, idiotic things I could think of.
I want to
Like
die with a
really,
big number in my bank account.
exactly like Warren Buffett, for instance. I'm sorry, but like that guy is too rich and too old to have any excuse to like not have made the world a better place. In fact, he's made it much worse because a lot of the products that he invests in are just pure sugar products. So like he single-handedly helped like create the obesity epidemic, I think, in the Western world, and which is encroaching into the rest of the world, um, through his acquiring of large amounts of stocks in Coca-Cola and Dairy Queen and all this stupid shit. It's so pathetic. It's like, what, no libraries, no laboratories, no, you know, space exploration programs in your name. It has to be, I have to die with a bigger number in my bank account and more houses. And because why stocks are fun, it's just like the whole thing is completely idiotic.
This is strange. There are a lot of resources that appear to be misused or um, staged improperly. They're at the ready. They could be concentrated and utilized to produce great progress and really have a great impact on our living situation, our understanding of our place in the universe. Yeah, we have an information problem where we've never in history had more access to technology and information, yet we don't really seem to be providing the same level of benefits to the corresponding advancements of technology. You know, people were like carving tools out of stone not that long ago.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And they still are in many parts of the world.
Yeah, yeah. And like it used to be, you fell and like broke your ankle, like you're done. You will probably never hunt again in your life. You might be okay at gathering, but you're immediately a burden on society. Your life is at risk from infection. If your foot opened up during that break, or if you had a really small group of humans, then maybe a lot of people depended on you, and that might have been just a death sentence for your little clan.
Absolutely. And it's amazing to see how far we've come from that sort of state, to like how much we've preserved and have multiplied um, our intelligence just by spreading welfare around.
I don't think people realize how hard it was to hunt, especially with no guns.
Absolutely.
It's hard enough for people to hunt. And for like now we just have a few people that make food for us, and we have most of the stuff really well figured out, but there's a much higher percentage of people that needed to hunt and gather. You make one wrong move on which plant to eat, and it might be the death of you if your whole family ate it, the death of a family. And getting close to animals to hunt them and kill them, prepare them. And it's not like you're only going to do that once. You have to do that a lot. Think about all the animals you've ever eaten in your entire life. That is a lot of animals.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think about just like if I were to only eat beef, I'm probably eating like a cow, if not more, a year, depending on how size of that animal would have been.
and
But
you can preserve that food too. They didn't have
yeah,
those methods.
yeah, absolutely. I think about that a lot too, just how like how much more you would have had to hunt because the preservation methods weren't as exact. I mean, they still did a great job with like cold smoking and curing and all that kind of cool stuff. That like even in the Native American museums over by me, like to show all the different preservation techniques they had, including things like creating pemmican and lacing things with fat because like storing it in fat would prevent the growth of bacteria as prevalent, and all sorts of like interesting things they did. It's amazing too because like okay, so we have that as our base layer too. Like that's involved. The fact that we have refrigeration is a huge game changer for a number of things. The fact that we can take a lot of diseases that would have spelt the death of individuals from a very early age, like diabetics or diabetes or any one of those, what we kind of consider like not so much curable but manageable
Yeah,
diseases. I mean, that has obviously increased the amount of the amount of individuals we have in our society, and therefore our amount of specialization and intellectual labor.
there are a lot of great takeaways from these lessons that we were analyzing. One was life was really hard, and it was very easy to die or to suffer. And people were still incredibly innovative and found ways to overcome challenges of literally life and death. And so now with our lifestyle, yes, we do still encounter difficulties, and there are social problems and there are physical problems. But we can also frame this in a way, in a comparative perspective, and use that as motivation to move towards progress back to actual unification that's not just based on division, which would mean that it's not unification.
I mean, absolutely. The like American experiment, so to speak, has not only like it's amazing too that going from just like this small tribal state to then being a little bit more inclusive and not allowing members of our society to die just because they were a risk. We could absorb that risk because we had more welfare to kind of go around, and then ultimately we're at this state now where even those sorts of like genetic tribal barriers, that sort of like ethnicism that has kind of permeated throughout our species for so long, is just almost a mute point at this point in time. Like, yeah, it's there and we understand it, and people have had amazing sort of genetic adaptations to the world that make them resilient in all sorts of different ways. And instead of bickering about stupid characteristics, we could just harness all of those amazing capabilities to make huge leaps forward in anything involving medicine and creature comforts. It's really incredible to see how far that we've come, and to like be stumbling now over stupid shit is, I think that's what like infuriates us the most.
Because you know that we are capable of better.
We are, and if we're to continue to survive into the future, I think we really need to kind of kick back into that gear. It's like if you find yourself being a very rich person listening to this podcast, which I don't think you're out there, but I'm going to shoot my shot anyway. Like just develop your own space program. I'm not kidding you. Like just go in that direction. I don't know why some of these people have not like. Why haven't we seen anyone go off the deep end? Like we should have seen some sort of like we've seen people go off the deep end. Obviously, like I was thinking about Team Foxcatcher with the DuPont family fortune heir, who like decided instead of using this amazing family wealth to like benefit mankind, he was instead going to like rape the US Olympic team wrestlers inside his family country home for some fucking stupid reason. It's stuff like that, it's like, why don't you have the heir of, I don't know, like Estee Lauder or any of these other humongous companies just going off the deep end? It's like, okay, we're going to figure out UFO technology and go.
Yeah, I mean that guy, Team Foxcatcher, he did think outside the box though, because he thought the deer that were wandering on his property were spying on him,
I
as well
forgot
as
about that. Yep.
and there were like hundreds of trees lining his driveway, and he thought that they were all just government agents.
There's something kind of like hilarious about that because of like how dangerous those chemicals were that the family was working in for your heir to end up like that. It's just like, well, huffing the family paint for 7 generations, I guess, makes you like that. But
That would be interesting to analyze sometime the motives of rich people and this kind of strange accumulation and temporary to permanent hoarding of wealth and whatever they tell themselves versus what reasons they have that, yes, I know this is my reason, but I can't disclose this is my reason because then people won't like me and it will impact my ability to accumulate more wealth. But I'm sure that a lot of people say, oh, well, I want money for my family because I never want my family to have to work. I never want them to suffer if they need something, unexpected bills. But you end up just with this exhaustive list, and then you can just kind of move the field goal post where no amount ever actually becomes enough, even if it's well in excess of what's enough. They could just, like you said, I'm going to solve UFO technology. I'm going to learn everything that we already know and maybe create and synthesize some new puzzle piece connections off of that. And then where do I contribute my own intellectual thought to this and synthesize brand new ideas from what we do already know instead of just buy a bigger yacht? Because yes, yachts are cool and they're filled with awesome technology. And also, we figured out that boats float a long time ago, and that's about all there is to it. Like
And
it
like
floats and it moves. Wow.
yeah, there's only so many like 18-year-olds that you can fuck to, you know what I mean? Like there's like at what point are you doing this for just other people's imagined view of yourself rather than doing something interesting with your legacy?
Yeah, maybe part of that's just the hedonistic allure and the aversion away from pain and towards pleasure. And the way that
Yeah,
that can happen is wealth accumulation. So
I
my
would
life
love
is
so
easy.
hard to just like try to undermine that as much as I can. Just because like there is a certain amount of personal satisfaction to it. Just like what you're going to get another red Ferrari, so you could just keep imagining your this 1980s Wolf on Wall Street sort of like fucking fiction that you're living in your head. Like it's so sad. It's like sure you could bully people into that position and you're doing so currently, and a lot of people on your board agree with you, and you'll continue to pump out, you know, woke advertisements and products in order to try to do whatever you can to scrape your way to the biggest market share so you can, I don't know, do nothing with your life still. Still die lonely with everyone hating you.
I suppose those parts are still intellectually lazy. They had one strategy or a few strategies that worked really well to get them to where they are and to continue remaining where they are and consolidate their position. And then outside of that, there's not a lot going on, seemingly, as far as like improving society as a whole in innovative ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I mean, like, isn't that just like the greatest prize? Wouldn't that just be the ultimate? That's why I'm like so bummed out at their sort of, I guess, current behavior, that I just feel like there's something so much greater that they have the immediate means to sort of pursue. And even if they did, like the risk to them is still so minimal. They can still live out the rest of their days with such a, you know, even if they were just being conservative about the amount that they were investing.
Maybe they're just not inspired. I'm trying to think of inventions in my head that were really inspiring, like paper. That's amazing. And if I just read a list of 100 inventions, I might be permanently inspired. Like paper, phones,
Interchangeable
planes.
parts.
Okay. Yeah,
That's just
and
one.
to really think about how, not just to read the name of that invention, but oh, interchangeable parts. Wow, this has made mass manufacturing possible. This has made all of these appliances available to people. This has made transportation, uh, and to really go down, at least for a short period of time, those paths of what that invention allowed to happen. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
impossible to not be inspired.
I think that's why, despite the shortcomings of the Tesla company and maybe the short sightedness of some of the business aspects of the company, the engineering itself is so incredibly inspirational. The amount of tech that they were able to develop for that vehicle, I think, is just absolutely amazing. And it always puts a smile on my face. And yeah, maybe I might not buy one still because of the weird sort of predatory practices that they've been implementing lately involving software and having components of your vehicle that you can't access unless you pay a premium. But it's still kind of a masterpiece, just how far they've been able to come with just a vehicle.
I appreciate them as a company as well, and it's an interesting indicator. Their panel gaps, always get made fun of, and they are pretty bad. But also, the people who are working on those cars and trying to advance things are going to say, you know what, hinges, someone else can fix that. That's my energy needs to be funneled towards the insane advancement of this brushless AC motor, and everything else is just kind of tidying up the house, so to speak. You know, like we don't need geniuses dusting the coffee table, because that can be done later, can be done by somebody else. Like there are certain jobs that most people can do, and then there are other jobs that only certain people are equipped to do because of the
Absolutely. And
pathway of their life.
I do want to say that if anyone's listening to this who's worked for the Tesla company, and like I hope your experience was decent. I'm sure it's very hard work, but like I kind of just want to like thank you at the same time. Anyone who's worked in NASA, anyone who's worked in SpaceX, even anyone who's worked at CERN, even though I kind of poked fun at it earlier, just like thank you for trying all of these different things. And like you should be proud of no matter how little you think your contribution might have been. It's just so inspiring to have like this sort of stuff happen. And like even looking at like kitchen appliances, sometimes it's amazing to see the innovations and such that people have built into them just to make our lives so much easier. Like how much less human labor we have to go into washing dishes and cleaning our clothes.
Very, very true.
It's just that, we feel like we're on a precipice for a new age. We know that there's something here
Mm.
that if it's human origin or not, that there are new horizons to go down. I mean, like this to me, I would just use this as like inspiration porn, if anything, involving these UFOs to get to the next level. I am kind of worried because I've always thought that the dark forest um, solution to the Fermi paradox was the most likely.
Remind me what the
So,
dark forest
so
is.
the Fermi paradox for everyone out there is more or less the paradox is such that if life is so common, how come we haven't seen any of it yet? And the dark forest analogy essentially is that everyone is kind of like us, more or less, that we're hunters in a deep dark forest that know that there are predators out there. So no one's making the first move because we all know that we'll encounter danger that way because we are intelligent. So it's like a giant game of Mexican standoff,
Wow.
but we all don't know where the other person is.
Turns into a massive game of Clue.
Yeah, yeah, hide and seek, whatever you want to call it. It's just more or less that everyone is purposefully withholding information because they know that's where power is.
The most dangerous game.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So I've always been interested in that particular solution because that to me seems the most wise. Obviously, it seems wise in the way that the prisoner's dilemma would work. It's a suboptimal game, but it seems the most realistic based on the individual's incentives.
And you always want everyone else to put down their weapons while you're still holding yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And as soon as they find out that maybe we're not as, because maybe they're holding back, maybe they're like, man, these humans, these fuckers here, they may have something hiding that we don't know about, which is incredible. Or they may not. And so I think if they were just studying us for the time being, hopefully that's the case. Hopefully we can keep fooling them if they mean us harm. But I think they know that humans would we would do scorched earth. I think that's actually like probably the most likely reason why it's either we have to be wiped out all at once very easily, or else we're going to make this place uninhabitable for anyone.
Yeah, if you were smart enough to recognize that you were a very powerful entity and that it became known to humans, then it would be a foregone conclusion that they view you as a threat. Therefore, it's in their best interest to take action against you given the opportunity. So I would have to know as an alien, I cannot give them that opportunity because just that's how things would play out.
It could be that we adapt just quickly enough that we will still be quite a threat. It could also be that space travel itself is just exceedingly difficult no matter what kind of technology you have. And so maybe the time distortions would still give um, an advantage in our favor. Maybe that's just something that we haven't really thought of too much. Again, another possibility that isn't necessarily any more likely than any others. It's just another area to explore.
Sometimes they say to go where no man has gone before, but what about to think where not many have thought before?
That is, I think, our next frontier. Think weird. Think differently. Really try to like. It doesn't matter. Like my whole thing with gravity before. Again, it just I am just shooting stuff into the void because maybe it makes a sort of sense that clicks something together for someone else who actually finds something amazingly meaningful off of that statement. Or maybe it's the exact opposite. Maybe it's so wrong that someone finds the right answer with how upset they were at me making such a such a
Yeah,
strange statement about how gravity could be. But I mean, that's the things that we have to play around with. Like you have to know that because the standard model and quantum gravity don't interact well together, they don't mesh, that our current answer is 100% wrong. It's 100% wrong. And even though it has a lot of the aspects that are true, it's just wrong because it doesn't work completely. And that's okay. And that's actually, that should be so exciting for everyone to explore a completely new way of going about it. And you'll have millions and millions of wrong answers. But as long as we keep trying to not do the same thing over and over and over again, I think we'll find the answer, even if we just happen upon it. Because right now we're kind of stuck in the mode of we're a bunch of monkeys typing out Shakespeare, but someone wants Chaucer,
I
and
was just
it just takes a monkey to like kind of tap the keyboard differently.
I was gonna make a joke. I was trying to think about how to deliver it. Like a new shipload or a new truckload of keyboards has arrived for the monkeys.
It's like maybe we just need to switch around the keys a little bit and not tell
They
the
need
monkeys, and then
give them the Dvorak keyboard layout, or just change the language input.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. It's like, well, we have Chaucer, but it's written in Russian.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And I believe there's a quote by Buddha that says a jug fills drop by drop. And that's interesting from a knowledge perspective, where if you get enough data and synthesis and wisdom in there, eventually it will overflow. And also, if you are that water molecule or you are one of those individual droplets, everybody's in this jar. And then eventually, like your brain, you're in that droplet that runs down the side of that giant, giant jug. And then you're in the new frontier. You're just seeing everything new. I'm just imagining being that little water droplet going down the side of that jug. It's like, wow, it's like so different now. Everything's changed.
And the path will be lonely sometimes, and that's okay. You're doing the best you can, and I hope that everyone just kind of rediscovers that playfulness that comes with seeking and discovering something new. And I kind of hope that at the end of the day, this new phenomena that we've sort of new old, we've been talking about it for a long time with UFOs in this country and around the world. But hopefully this kind of gives people a new little kick in the pants, so to speak, scientifically, and to organize their own lives in a way that is not so rat race like.
Yes, we should all imagine ourselves as that cave person who's watching that nuclear bomb detonate very, very far away where they're safe. And like you're very good at surviving, you're very good at life, you know a lot, but you are still surrounded by mystery and phenomenon that you can't explain, but which are knowable and understandable given the right tools to analyze, think about, and just really chew on and dissect and make
Yeah,
conclusions about.
yeah, absolutely. It's almost like that. The first step is to believe in some sort of way that it's possible.
Oh, I
It's
want to
just
believe.
figuring out how that is. I mean, I want people to believe in the possibility of the possible. For as funny as that sounds, it's more about having that we haven't figured anything out. Stop thinking that. If you're thinking that, you're wrong. We have not figured everything out. And even if you're stuck, just remember that there's actually more to think about. And yeah, it is hard. It's the hardest possible thing. And new generations will profit off of our struggle. But we owe it to them. We owe the next generation to try our hardest.
I'm on board with that. I like that.
Yeah, I think it's a good time actually to end that as well. I think, you know, take that, internalize it, go look for at your, go look for yourself online for all these different videos and stuff that we've talked about. Commander David Fravor, either
Bob
on Joe
Lazar.
Rogan. Yeah, Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar is an interesting one. Not as much hard evidence, I would say, in that one. But again, maybe it points to some interesting sort of shadowy parts of our government, which I kind of hope exist, that are actually researching these things to a serious extent.
It's a captivating story, if anything else.
If anything else, yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, it inspires you and inspires you to go beyond what you think you're capable of doing. And I really wish that for you. So, best of travels, friends, and we'll catch you next time.